What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of the Struggle to Strength podcast, your source for real-life application on how to turn your struggles into strengths in all things mind, muscle, and money. I am your host, Josh Levine, and I am joined here by my longtime friend and my co-host, Travis Hatch. And today, we are joined by Children's Holistic Health and Nutrigenomics practitioner, Dr. Piper Gibson, to talk about all things genetic, neurodevelopmental disorders, and more. I think you'll find this episode very interesting. It's always a great time chatting with these practitioners, and it was great that we did agree on most things, except for one big item that, knowing me, you won't be surprised by. But you will have to listen through to find out, so stay tuned. Before we get into it, we ask that if you love this episode, please give us 5 stars on Apple or a follow on Spotify. Share us on your socials. You can find me at Josh Levine Fitness, Travis at Travis Hawks Media, and Dr. Piper Gibson at Regenerating Health. Tags are in the show notes. Plus, y'all can follow the podcast on IG now. We just launched socials for the show, so please go follow us on Instagram at Struggle to Strength Podcast. Struggle to Strength Pod?
Struggle to Strength Pod.
Struggle to, as in the number 2, Strength Pod. All right, go give us a follow. We're going to be posting clips up there very shortly. That's it. That's all I've got for you right now. I hope y'all enjoy this episode. We will see you inside. What's brutally hot to you, though? Because it's
like 105, 110 is pretty hot. Like 95, not so much.
Yeah, I would burn alive in that. I'm a cold weather person. I don't do well. We're in Colorado.
Yeah. You can keep that cold there.
We'll take it. Yeah, honestly, we'll take it. Well, cool. I'm glad that we were able to connect and get you on here. Travis had found you on Guestio, and I was excited to, look at your bio, and then I checked out your Instagram page, and I was like, okay, we're either going to agree on a lot of things or we're going to disagree on a lot of things. But it looks like we're very well aligned. And so I think this is going to be a great conversation. And I'm very interested to learn a little bit from you. So yeah, I'm excited.
Awesome.
Yeah. But I wanted to, 1, give you the opportunity to introduce yourself, and 2, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do and how you got started doing what you do now.
Yeah. So my name is Piper Gibson. I am a board certified doctor of natural medicine. I have a doctorate in advanced holistic nutrition. I have about 500 other certifications. I am also the corporate clinical educator for GX Sciences. So I spend a lot of my week teaching practitioners how to utilize Nutrigenomics in their own offices. And so I got into this because 9 years ago, my oldest son was diagnosed with a transient neurological tic. So it's very much like Tourette syndrome without the actual Tourette's diagnosis. One day he was fine, and the next day he was twitching and jerking and having all these issues. And we started going to the pediatrician. We got a diagnosis, and he said, I think you should just ignore it. He'll grow out of it, but let me send you to the neurologist. And the neurologist was not any better because he said he just needs a good spanking. And so, long story short, the conventional model just was failing us. And so I decided to go back to school and relearn everything I thought I knew about health and wellness. And so now I work with families whose children struggle with neurodevelopmental disorders. So ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, obsessive compulsive, tics, Tourette's, lots of anxiety. And I really help give them the tips, tools, and resources that they need to help get their child back on track, because so many parents feel lost like I did.
That's amazing. And I think, 1, it's amazing that you were able to do this for your oldest son and learn about how to actually fix this, because far too often the conventional system, it's not my favorite. So, we have to learn how to fix things ourselves sometimes. And it's really interesting that you've been able to do that. I'm very fascinated with the concept of nutrigenomics, especially as someone who, Travis and I, we both have anxiety. Mine's really bad. And so I'm curious to learn more about, are these neurological or neurodevelopmental disorders, are we born with them? Are they genetic? Are they something that we develop over time? And what can cause those? What I'm thinking of is my ADHD and my anxiety and my OCD. But of course, I'm curious about all of it.
Yeah, so I'll kind of address that. 1, I will tell you that nutrigenomic testing completely changed my lifelong anxiety. I thought anxious was just who I was. Like I just was a very anxious person. And once we started working on my son, of course I had to work on myself. So that completely changed for me. I no longer struggle with that. But it's really, to me, it is a combination. There is not one cause, but a combination. So when we look at nutrigenomics, it's the study of your genetics and nutrition and how it goes together. We can look at your basic blueprint. What do your genes look like? What do they need as far as nutrition? But then we also need to look at those outer factors, those underlying things like, what's your diet like? Do you have food sensitivities, foods that you probably really shouldn't be eating? Do you have genes for chronic inflammation? What can we do to bring down the inflammation in your body, which can really lead to a lot of anxiety? Diet changes and lifestyle changes and sleeping better, certain supplements based on your genes. So it's really kind of a multifaceted thing that's going on, not just one thing. It's where we're using those genes to look at your blueprint and then figuring out how to go from there.
Interesting. I'm fascinated by this because it sounds a lot like what I do with my clients is, we have issues either with sleep or digestion or recovery or stress, and we aim to identify the cause of those and then implement solutions to fix them or improve them. But we can actually test for those and see it in a genetic map.
So yeah, you can really look at a lot of different genes. At GX Sciences, we look at 121 different genes right now. We have all sorts of really cool stuff on the horizon. But we can really look at these genes and what it means for you and how it applies to you. So there's other genetic testing companies out there. I'll give you that. But they are not guiding you. They are not explaining how it applies to you as a person and as a patient. So we can look at those things and say, okay, you have an increased need for vitamin D based on these particular genes, or you have an increased anxiety based on these particular genes. And we can really kind of come up with that optimal support for your body. Okay.
So like talking about vitamin D, the first thing my head goes is I usually like to see my clients with vitamin D levels around like 60, I think is usually good. But what you're saying is that there may be even more highly individualized levels. Like some people might do better at 80 and some people might do better at 50.
So the way that it works is, I'll tell you, I have a lot of clients who have chronically low vitamin D, like in the 20s, and they cannot get it up. And we can look at their genes and say, okay, you one, have poor delivery of vitamin D based on your genes, and two, you have poor vitamin D binding protein. So when you have the combination, we know that you really need to take more vitamin D. You need to spend more time out in the sun, but really getting more of that supplementation to get those levels up. So yes, I'm kind of with you. I like levels at about 70, but definitely we can look at, I cannot get my vitamin D levels up. Well, why is that? Let's look at your genes and what can we do to kind of remedy that.
That's really cool.
So a simple explanation of neurogenomic testing is basically like a test that allows you to check these things, these levels, and like why they're happening. Like what would be like a really simple explanation of what that testing actually is doing?
So this is what I tell my clients, plain English, is that nutrigenomic testing is like, if you had a crack in the foundation of your house, you would do everything you possibly could to reinforce that crack so that you could continue to live there and have a really awesome house. Nutrigenomics is the same way. When we can look at your foundation, your basic building blocks, we know what we need to remove to support your body and what we need to add in. What do we need to reinforce to your body? So we're really looking at that foundational system and what we can remove and what we can keep. So for example, there are a lot of people who have genetic variants for increased risk of gluten sensitivity and celiac disease. When we see that on a test, and maybe we tested in food sensitivities, or, we're like, this doesn't mean you're going to get celiac disease, but definitely predisposes you to celiac disease. So, maybe we can recommend that you follow a gluten-free diet based on your genes, because we know if you're not exposed to the gluten, you're not going to get the celiac disease.
Now, is that something that you see in your genetic testing, or do you use a wheat zoomer for that?
I see it on my genetic testing.
Okay.
I do food sensitivity testing like Zoomers as well.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I can see a lot in genes.
Okay. Wow. That's really fast. And then, I mean, the way I'm thinking of this is when I'm working with a client, I see a symptom and I can trace that symptom back to a cause, but we're looking straight at the cause, like straight at the foundation here. That seems incredibly valuable.
It's life-changing. It's extremely valuable. I think that it's really kind of been cutting edge, but it's really on the cusp of really exploding and people learning how to do it. I mean, I teach doctors and nurses and providers all day long how to use this testing in their own practices so that they can use it with their own patients. And you really get better patient compliance because it's like, these are your genes. This is what it looks like. This is what you should be doing based on your genes. You get better compliance and you really do get better outcomes.
Yeah. It's not just, well, are you sick of like having irregular bowel movements and stomach aches and sitting on the toilet for so long that your legs go numb? It's like, no, you're like, no, this is a thing for you.
Absolutely. And we have gastrointestinal panels. We can look at that. Are you chronically constipated or do you have IBS? Let's take a closer look at your genes. Maybe you have some predisposition there.
That's really fascinating.
Wow.
Now, this all, of course, relates to the neurodevelopmental side as well. Like we know how well the gut and the brain are connected. So that's kind of where I was going with my question on whether, some of these disorders we're born with them, or if we're born with a gut issue that is not addressed and turns into a neurodevelopmental disorder like anxiety. Do you have any information or data on that?
Yes. So what happens is we're born with this predisposition, whatever it may be. If we lived a perfectly clean life for our whole lives, we may never have any issues. But what we find is there is a triggering event, whether that triggering event is stress, an accident, kids who are growing, maybe they had an infection and they took 12 tons of antibiotics, maybe they're being bullied in school, whatever that particular triggering event is, it kind of pushes you down this vortex where you're already predisposed, you're just kind of standing on the edge, but you get pushed in. And then once you're down there at the bottom, you are going to have to do certain things to get yourself out, because based on your genes, you cannot use this nutrition properly to pull yourself out. Maybe you need some extra assistance. So it's like throwing in ropes to pull people out of that vortex. So yes, you're predisposed and then something pushes you in, and it may be many things that push you in. It may be stress. It may be an infection. It may be, that you are predisposed to this gut issue.
Mm-hmm. So this is very challenging because a lot of kids, myself included, like we thought I just had like IBS, total umbrella term, right? I've had digestive issues since I was a child. I had colic as a baby, IBS throughout my childhood. We thought I was lactose intolerant, all these things. Nothing was ever actually addressed. I don't think that's abnormal for children to go through. So what can adults do? What can parents do to help see that before it happens and not exacerbate symptoms or actually like try to fix things before they do fall in?
I wish more parents realize that there is functional testing out there. There are things that you can use to not just ignore your child's symptoms, which is 9 times out of 10 what you're told when you go the conventional route. Just ignore it.
Yep.
They're fine. But really looking at those kind of things like the stool pathogens and the food sensitivities and the Nutrigenomics, putting it all together. But, I feel like this day and age, if I had my way, every child that was born would get a genetic test. Here's your blueprint.
Yep.
Here's the things that you should do. It won't happen because, insurance companies are not going to make tons of money off of it. Nope. But, I do work with some families where we are really testing their young children, their new babies, just because they want to know, like, what's my child's risk? Should I get 47 vaccines on the same day? And we can kind of look at that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, if I had my way, we would swab everybody.
Okay. And it's just a swab? There's not blood tests or anything?
It is just a swab. There's different kinds of genetic testing, but we use a butyl swab. It's just like a giant Q-tip.
And that's it. And it gives you the whole blueprint. Okay. So yeah, the question is, why wouldn't you do that?
Exactly. And I think that a lot of parents don't know it exists. And 2, a lot of doctors don't know how to use it. If you go ask your pediatrician for this testing, they're going to 1 say, oh, you don't need that. And 2, even if they ordered it, they don't know how to read it. They don't understand it.
Well,
it's not what they're.
The other thing that I find with conventional healthcare is, well, 1, yeah, they're going to tell you don't need it. Like they tell most people as they get older, you don't need your hormones tested. I'm like, okay, well, then how do I know how much worse I am before? I have a whole thing with this. But also, they're usually just looking for you to be within a range. And so does the same, it's a huge range. And we know that, okay, if the range is, I'll use testosterone, for example, it's from 250 to 1200. And if you're at 300, your doctor's going to say, oh, you're in range, and you're suffering from all these negative symptoms of low testosterone. So is there a same thing where there's a range for the genetic testing, or is there like a way that that doctors can learn how to read those tests? Because I think that's another barrier, is they don't know how to read the results.
So there's not a range. You either have, you're either heterozygous, which means you have one mutation, you get one from mom, one from dad, or you're homozygous, which means you get one from each parent. And so there's not a range. Like, this is what your genes are and this is what it's saying. And so that's why companies like GX Sciences, you can get on the phone with me and say, I ran my patient's genes. Can you please tell me how to read it and how to explain it to them? And so then I take that time with them to explain that testing.
Okay. I like that. So once you get this testing done, say we're later on in life, myself, for example, if we have already developed some of these disorders, such as ADHD, anxiety, OCD, things like that, how do you approach improving those symptoms like you did for yourself?
Yeah. So basically, I just looked at my genes and said, okay, these are my genetic variants. This is where my parents passed on some crappy genes, and I made changes based on that. So, I did have the HLA-DQ-A2, so the celiac predisposition. So I got rid of gluten. I have some predispositions for not being able to synthesize vitamin E and vitamin A. So I need to take much more vitamin E and vitamin A. And so really being able to dial in that nutrition and make diet and lifestyle changes. My inflammatory genes are all over the place. You have on and off switches for inflammation. So I can really turn it on, but I have a really hard time turning it off. I know I have to be super cautious about inflammation. I follow a low inflammatory diet. I try not to get overly stressed out. I do all the detox, sauna, things like that, because I know based on my genes that if I get overly inflamed, I'm going to have some anxiety, and I'm not going to feel so hot.
And for the people listening, I want this to really be driven home that when we're talking about inflammation like this, yes, stress plays a huge role in that. And that's part of why we're always pushing stress mitigation. A lot of people don't know how stressed they are. They associate stress with that like overwhelming feeling. And no, that's like panic. That's just being overwhelmed. So you mentioned you do sauna, and I'm all about stress mitigation techniques. When it comes to in my realm of physique enhancement and fitness coaching, we're all about stress mitigation. That's all it is. What else do you like to do, and what else do you do for your clients to help improve their inflammation? Is it supplementation? Is it, sauna sessions? Is it grounding? Is it meditation and breath work?
All of the above. It really kind of depends. And it kind of depends, because I work with so many kids, what you can get kids to do.
Yep. True. Okay.
I love heart math on the computer. They've got a few games where kids can breathe. YouTube has great free meditations. If you have access to saunas and your kids will sit in them, they're great. But for kids, it's like, get out and exercise, get off your butt, get outside, get some sunlight, get it early in the morning so that you sleep well at night. And really kind of figuring out, do they have an genetic variants that really keep them from maybe detoxing very well? So in our house, we do glutathione IVs once or twice a year to help with detoxification. And it really depends. I've got some clients who have great detoxification genes. They have not so great inflammatory genes and not so great autophagy genes, which is your body cell recycling system. So it's really very, very individualized as far as what those results are going to be and those recommendations you would make.
Yes. And once you mentioned the kids, I was like, yeah, no, you're not going to get a kid to sit still for 10 minutes and meditate.
I would guess that children and adults probably have very different stress mitigation techniques. Like maybe that's what I would guess. Do you find that that's true?
I do, I'll tell you that adult stress mitigation techniques include things like, drinking wine after work. And for kids, it's really making sure that they are physically active and that they're burning energy. When we talk about inflammation, we know that when you're sitting at your desk and you have inflammation, your body is using an extremely high rate of energy. So we really have to look at the aspects of one, their age, but two, what their genes are like, three, their diet, four, their gut health. It's really a very compound issue, I think.
So with like a standard day at a public school where you're fed like incredibly poor, like basically food with zero nutrition in it, plenty of sugar, zero other nutrients, and then you're forced to sit still staring at a wall. That sounds like probably the worst possible thing for a child's stress levels.
It is. I have gone to the school, and I'm not kidding. I've looked at their huge notebook full of food, and honestly, the healthiest thing in there at the time was a whole wheat donut, which just makes me cringe to say.
Really? It's like that now?
Sounds like a torture, like a manufactured torture situation.
When I look at the breakfast menu at school, so there's so many kids. This kid has ADHD. This kid has ADD. This kid cannot sit still. This child cannot focus. They need a special plan. Let's start with breakfast. So the breakfast at the school includes garbage like crumb cake. Crumb cake has no nutritional value. It has a small amount of protein because they have to give them like 2% of the RDA a day of protein or whatever.
Oh my God.
But
that's just the RDA.
It's like worse than prison.
By the way, that's just the RDA. Yeah, that's not optimal.
Prisoners get treated better, I think, in jail.
You need protein to break down, to make amino acids, to make your neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine that help you feel good and focus and function. If you're starting a breakfast with crumb cake that's going to cause inflammation, heck no, your kids are not going to sit down and focus. And so I'm like, you need to focus on protein at breakfast and not garbage.
Yeah. That's really frustrating. I didn't know it was like that. I mean, I never really ate the school food, probably because my mom saw what was in it.
Yeah, I have to give like a huge shout out to my mom. Like at the time when I was little, it was kind of weird, but basically me and my brother both got diagnosed with like insane ADHD, and they're like, whoa, just put him on Adderall. And my mom was like, no, and just pulled us out of the school and sent us to this like weird homeschool, like private school thing where we just ran around in the woods and like learned stuff. And like at the time, I guess it was kind of weird, but like thinking back on it, I'm like, the more I know now, it sounds like she was very ahead of her time and nailed it with that, because I think, we got to just like run around and be outside and get exercise and be creative. And like we ate the food that she made. She had her own garden and stuff. So it's, pretty awesome.
Your mom's my soul sister, because I have been there, done that. I have two boys. And when all of this started happening out of the school, we homeschooled for 3 years. They're back in school now, but I certainly make their lunch every day.
We turned out great. So,
Your mom was not wrong.
No.
That's awesome. Yeah. It seems like the more you learn about this and the more you know about nutrition, and then you see what's happening in the schools, it makes no sense, but it's to me, it seems like it's kind of ran the same way our conventional healthcare system is run, where it's just like Band-Aid solutions. And they're never getting to the root cause. And all these kids, like you mentioned, have these neurodevelopmental disorders, and they're just like, oh, just give them a gym class. Like, let them run it off. And like, yeah, sure, let them move. But how about we pay attention to what's going into our body? How about we pay attention to how they're interacting with other people? How about we pay attention to the fact that they're not actually getting outside. They're sitting inside on computers and tablets all day, and they're not getting the stress management techniques that they need. That seems like it's the biggest issue, especially when we're talking about stress management for children.
Yeah, no, it really is. We don't look at food and what they're eating, and so much of the food industry is influenced by big agriculture that, it's like, oh, you need 40 glasses of milk a day, and you need, you need your whole grains and all of these things that I'm like, you know what? There's not a one size fits all diet, first of all. And second of all, there are people who just do not thrive on a whole grain diet. They just don't. It's too inflammatory.
Yeah. In fact, a lot of people, with most of my clients that I work with, the majority of people who suffer from some sort of digestive issue, we pull out gluten and dairy, and 9 out of 10 times it gets better. I don't, it's frustrating that it's continuing to be pushed, and like, there's good alternatives. It's not that hard to go gluten-free and dairy-free.
It's not, but I work with so many parents, and I have some parents that are just like, it's so hard. My kids will move out. They just won't do it. And I'm like, you are the parent. Your child doesn't have a driver's license. They cannot go to the store. just don't buy it. Make substitutions. I'm going to help you make substitutions. But they really are very hesitant to make diet changes.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I have a question about that. So like we said, that's a pretty common day in the life for most people, most kids who are at a public school. What kind of long lasting effect does that have on them? Years of doing that as they grow into an adult, do you find like that's what causes a lot of these anxiety disorders and ADHD is them, not having the optimal nutrition and stuff, or like what kind of effects have you seen that causes for adults?
Yeah. It's hard to say like where those long-term issues kind of stem from. It's probably, again, a combination of they ate a crappy diet their whole life, and probably not just at school. They probably going to McDonald's for dinner. So it's probably a combination of that and stress in the environment. And, did you grow up in a traumatic household where your parents were fighting all the time, or, things like that. So I think there again, we're looking at that compound factor, but we can look at, okay, you have these genes for aggressive inflammation. And you have lived this entire portion of your life, you're 40 years old, under a chronic amount of stress. You have gut pathogens, you eat a cruddy diet. All of these factors. And then we can say, okay, like we know that we need to turn down your immune system, that we need to do some work, but we also need to make these other changes.
Now, when you are making these other changes, obviously it sounds like you take a very holistic approach. And it's mostly lifestyle change. And do you use any sort of supplementation? I know you said you use glutathione IVs. I'm curious to learn what other types of supplementation you use.
I use lots of different supplementation, just depending on what we're looking at. So if we're looking at gut pathogens, we might be using something like biocidin and GI detox. But if we're looking at inflammation, we might be looking at something like CBD oil or PEA, which is
I was gonna say, I was like, I could pronounce it once upon a time.
But yeah, I use folate and 5-HTP and tyrosine and curcumin, really dependent on who that person is and what we're looking at and what kind of changes they need. So it's I would say that for my clients, I don't ever make the same recommendations twice, that it's always going to be something different. Yeah,
always something a little bit different. Now, do you ever get pushback on clients about taking that holistic approach, that natural approach, or do they want something fast, like an antibiotic or something?
One, they've been indoctrinated to think that there is some kind of magical pill out there that's going to make everything better and they're going to wake up tomorrow and everything's going to be fabulous. Mm-hmm. That's really not the case. And it really is a matter of mindset and changing their mind and being like, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You are not going to wake up tomorrow better. But yes, I do get pushback. I've had clients that I will make all of these recommendations and then they will turn around and question every single thing that I've recommended. And, I then have to go back and explain why, again, I've made these particular recommendations. But yes, they also get on the internet and they also Dr. Google. And then they're like, well, I read this about this supplement and that about this supplement. I'm like, there's a particular reason we're using this particular thing.
Yep. Yeah. I think all too often in probably both our fields, people think that there's a very quick solution. And honestly, more often than not, what I find is that their desire to get that quick fix and that quick solution is probably what got them to this place in the first place, like to where they are in the first place.
Oh yeah, because you're like dopamine.
Yeah,
and that's how a lot of us get there. We're like, oh, let me do all these things that are not healthy, but they give me a dopamine fix, and then when I feel like crap later, I want a magic pill.
Yeah, it is definitely a marathon, and it can suck. Personally, I've gone through my own journey of improving my digestion and my gut health. And it took a while and it sucked. And elimination diets are not fun. But how, in order to fix some of these things that we're talking about here, there's some things like a SIBO that we need to be pretty much 100% consistent with. You can't really deviate in order to fix it. How consistent do people have to be in order to improve, their anxiety or their ADHD in their gut cleanse?
Yeah. So for example, we know that if you have gluten sensitivity, that it can take about 6 months for those gluten antibodies to dissipate in the body. And we know that if you have these inflammatory variants in your genes, that gluten can be very inflammatory. So when we look at that, it's about, okay, we know that the gluten is probably one of the things that's turning your immune system on, but we know that gluten can cause these antibodies for up to 6 months. So yes, at some point you have to be very strict and really commit to removing things from your diet. Because for me, it's like, well, if you're really good for 3 months and then you have to have that piece of pizza, that's really going to throw a monkey wrench in that. Because for some people, based on their genes and based on their gut health, that can get you right back to square one. So yeah, I mean, a lot of times, the people that I'm working with, I've had a lot of amoebas lately, and it's like, let's be really strict for 60 to 90 days and work on, on a natural approach for getting rid of these pathogens in your body.
Mm-hmm. It's tough to be that strict, but it is interesting to hear. And I'm glad that we have you to confirm this now. I've always been under the assumption, based on working with myself and then working with all my clients, that they're, like you said, it's not one size fits all. So just because you show as gluten intolerant doesn't mean you have to be gluten-free forever. I know personally, I'm okay if I'm like 90% gluten-free. Whereas if I have to be like 99% dairy-free. Like if I have more than that, a little bit of dairy, yeah, it's going to fuck me up. But not everybody's like that.
No, but you know what people don't realize, and we'll talk about that since you talk about having anxiety, is that I don't think that there is partially gluten-free. You're either 100% gluten-free or not gluten-free, because gluten is so inflammatory. We know that gluten causes leaky gut in everybody. If you look at the Harvard studies, we know that it's causing that intestinal permeability. And so many people, they're like, gluten doesn't bother my gut, but it bothers their brain, causes a lot of anxiety and other issues as well. So for me, once I completely removed the gluten and then I had a little bit, I realized how much it actually impacted my brain and my anxiety, and not my gut. It doesn't bother my gut, but my brain, it fucks me up.
Really? That's interesting.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't noticed that much, but maybe I'll just go 100% gluten-free again and pay attention and see if I notice a difference.
Yeah. Do it for like 6 months and then, go out and eat some pizza or whatever. And just kind of notice, and it's usually not immediate. It's like 2 or 3 days later, but like I will be standing somewhere and I would just be like, I want to cry all day.
It's like a hangover kind of. It's like a gluten hangover.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now, when you're reintroducing foods after eliminating them for this amount of time, do you have a process for how you introduce them, like one every 4 days? And when you do introduce them, do you usually introduce them in small amounts, or do you have people eat a bolus of that food to see if they get a result?
So like the Beastie Boys say, low and slow, that is the tempo. We do probably one food every 5 days. So let's say we're going to reintroduce eggs, like have one egg on Monday, and then really monitor how you feel Tuesday, Wednesday. And then if you're okay, like Tuesday, Wednesday, try it again on Thursday. So they're going to have that same food a couple times in that first week, really monitor. And then if we get to, hey, it didn't bother me at all, then that next week we might add in an additional food just to kind of see where we're at. Like maybe it's tomatoes or onions or something like that.
Okay. And yeah, just so you can actually identify what is causing the trigger.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't have them really eat a huge amount, just because for a lot of people, when you add things back in, a little, like one egg may not be too bad, but you have 3 eggs and you're like, not feel so good.
Yes. And you don't want to have to start all over.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
No. And that's one of the reasons I like food sensitivity testing, especially with children, is because we can really narrow it down without having to remove everything.
Yeah, that's why I liked it as well. What I'm starting to get into more now is GI mapping. Have you ever done much of that?
Oh, I do a lot of GI map.
Okay, yeah.
GI map.
Yeah. Do you find it more accurate than food sensitivity testing?
I use them together,
okay,
just because, we can look on a GI map and someone has low SIG-A, that their immune system's not great, and they have high calprotectin or high gliadin. So yeah, I like to use them kind of in combination. I think it just really connects the dots for people. And I can say, here's your genes.
Yep.
Here's your stool test. here's your food sensitivity test. This is really how I kind of foresee this going together.
What are they? Like what is a food sensitivity test, GI mapping, and what's the difference, and what do you use them for?
So food sensitivity testing looks at IgG. So it's a delayed reaction to a food. So an allergy would be the immediate reaction. Your throat closes up, your lips swell, whatever that may be. But that IgG testing is delayed. So it might take like 24, 48, 72 hours for your immune system to get turned on. What people do is they think, I feel horrible. What did I eat for lunch? Not, I feel horrible. What did I eat for lunch on Monday? And so we look at that delayed reaction. So the GI map testing is a stool pathogen test. It's basically going to take a sample of your poo and look at the DNA of the different bacteria and pathogens that are in your gut. So it looks at things like protozoa and worms. And it also looks at your inflammatory factors like secretory IgA is that chemical barrier in the gut that really supports your immune system. And if they have low secretory IgA, that their immune system's not so hot. And so it's really a matter of, I can look at those food sensitivities. These foods should go, but you also have an amoeba based on your stool test. So maybe we should do this kind of protocol. And then of course the genes is just that basic blueprint like we talked about.
Now with the food sensitivity, something that I find is, and I'm sure you'll agree, more oftentimes with food sensitivity testing, the foods that you eat the most are what show up the most. How do you go about pulling those out, or do you pull those out?
I do see that a lot, but I'll tell you with kids, and especially the ones that I work with, is that the foods they're most sensitive to are gluten and dairy because they're using them as comfort foods. They bind to those opioid receptors in the brain and kind of give you that opioid effect.
Yep.
And so we do definitely pull them out, even if it's for a couple of months. I had one client, the only thing that showed up was onions, and she felt horrible. And she's like, I love onions. They're my favorite. So of course she was eating them all the time. She pulled them out and she lost like 30 pounds in like 2 months.
Oh my God.
Wow. Yeah, it was really eye-opening for her, but I'm like, it's just a testament to me that, removing certain foods that can be inflammatory to the body make a huge difference.
Yes. This is something that I want to talk about because I get a ton of clients, and I think especially clients who are, middle-aged and who have been trying to diet and lose weight for a long time, and who have probably, like you and I know, have screwed up their guts, are completely overstressed, their hormones are out of whack, they're eating like 1,100 calories a day. No wonder you can't lose weight, right? But they're also not paying attention to what they're eating. They think they're eating quote unquote healthy, right? And yeah, sure, onions are a vegetable. Like those are supposed to be quote unquote healthy, right? Same with broccoli, same with cauliflower and all these other foods that cause so many issues. If we just pay attention to how we're feeling with the foods that we're eating, you could lose a lot of weight. And granted, watching the scale go down is not the most important variable, but if that's what you've been trying to do and it's not working, maybe you need to look at what you're eating. A food sensitivity test would probably help.
Yeah, that's really true. I love food sensitivity testing. I've been experimenting with the carnivore diet myself just because this might be another episode.
Yeah. I'm curious now.
so many anti-nutrients in our vegetables and toxins that are in our vegetables and things that we probably really shouldn't be eating. Like I love potatoes. They're full of glycoalkaloids that can cause all sorts of issues. So I've just kind of been experimenting because I don't want to recommend things to my clients that I haven't tried. I'm like, hey, let's try it on my best experiment. But really, when you think about that, like maybe certain vegetables just aren't good for everybody.
Mm-hmm. I definitely want to hear more about the carnivore diet because it's something that I've heard about, but I don't really know. Like I've never heard about it from someone who's done it before, or especially someone who is as knowledgeable as you and has done it before. Yeah.
How have you started it already?
Yeah, I've done it twice.
Okay.
The first time I did it, it was rough. It was very rough. And you end up with what's called disaster pants, like just weeks of diarrhea.
Oh, no.
But so after about 2 weeks, the first time I was like, forget this, I'm done. I did like lose a ton of weight. But the second time I tried it, I'm doing it now. I did not have those results at all. And, I felt really good. I'm sleeping really good. I have a lot of energy. My ketones are up. I too know I should not eat a lot of dairy. So I'm trying to do, because on a carnivore diet, there's different levels. You don't just have to eat meat. It can be like meat, cheese, and eggs. So, I really focus on like 95% meat.
So I assumed that it was eating only meat. So it's kind of the opposite of vegan, right? It's eating only animal products.
Oh, it's the opposite of vegan. Yes, it's eating only animal products. So, shrimp and cheese. You can have dairy, you can have fish, you can have eggs, but for the most part, pork rinds on everything. But yeah, it's all meat.
Now, okay, something that I'm curious about. Well, I am very against the ketogenic diet, aside from if it's medically advisable. Have you noticed a difference in your energy levels?
Yeah, I feel good.
You feel good?
Yeah.
Okay. And do you train or do you weightlift at all?
I do.
Yeah. Have you noticed that your performance has gone down?
No.
Really? Has it gone up?
It may have gone up a little bit. I kind of changed up my workouts just recently. So I wouldn't say I've really noticed that. Ketogenic diets are not for everybody. They're really not, especially if you are eating like heavy fat and you have genetic predispositions for not being able to process saturated fats very well. So no, keto is not for everybody. But yeah, I haven't noticed my athletic performance go down at all.
Okay.
I'm going to watch though.
Yeah.
I'll watch.
Yeah, do watch because, from my perspective, okay, well, carbs are the body's preferred source of energy, especially carbs that digest well, right? Like not just going out and eating whatever you want. But carbs that digest well are the body's preferred source of energy. And so that's why I've never really recommended anybody remove them. But I am curious. I know Joe Rogan did the carnivore diet for a little bit, I think, too.
Yeah, he loves it too. So really, you make more energy from fat than you do from carbs. Like you make far more ATP from fat than you do from carbs. It's science, biochemistry. Look it up. You make more ATP, which is the energy in your mitochondria, from fat than you do from carbs. That's why people on the ketogenic diet see their energy go up, is because they're making far more energy in the mitochondria.
Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, I mean, in the Krebs cycle, in the electron transport chain, when you are making ATP, you make more ATP, which is the energy that's made in the mitochondria, from fat than you do from carbs. Like you have to know the biochemistry. This could be like another 2 hours of explaining biochemistry.
I know the Krebs cycle.
Yeah.
It's just, from my understanding of physiology, it's much more effective to create ATP from glucose.
Your body can make glucose from other amino acids. So it's not, there's things like your red blood cells that have to have glucose, and your body can actually do that process. But as far as making energy, you make more ATP from fat than you do from carbs. Okay.
I'm still standing by my carb thing until I get actual solid evidence. I'm going to stand by, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the implications of stress and high stress environments, because kind of what we're talking about up until now has just been about putting your body into a state where it is less stressed, obviously with the food that you're eating, with your environment itself. What do those high stress environments mean for your hormones and your gut health? And obviously that will affect your anxiety, your ADHD and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you are in a constant state of stress, it can cause that inflammation in the body, but can also cause things like leaky gut. So we know that, your gut, I like to say, is much like a sidewalk. When you're walking down the street, you don't want weeds coming through your sidewalk. Well, your gut is held tightly together by these tight gap junctions. And really only micronutrients should get through there. But when we're stressed out, we get this inflammation that kind of pushes these tight gap junctions apart, and it makes this leaky gut. It makes your gut permeable, where you can get foods, particles, and toxins and medications and all sorts of things into the bloodstream. Again, then your immune system gets turned on because it's in your bloodstream, and your immune system's like, hey, buddy, that doesn't belong there. What is that? And so stress can really cause these things like leaky gut. You get leaky gut. We know that your gut and brain are connected. So for every one signal your brain sends to your gut sends about 10 signals to your brain. So you have this constant connectivity And when you've got this leaky gut going on, you've got this immune system turned on, causes the immune system in your brain to become activated. So you have microglial cells in your brain. It's part of the immune system in your brain. And when these cells get activated, they release cytokines, which is part of your immune system, which in turn you end up with a glutamate storm, which is very excitatory to the brain. Glutamates are what we call an excitotoxin. So yes, when you're under this constant state of stress, whether it's from your boss being a jerk or, just from what's going on in our environment, you can end up with all of this gut brain mess going on.
And I'm glad you mentioned that last part, because I think, like we talked about earlier, people think of stress as just the overwhelming feeling of stress, but really your body doesn't know the difference between stress from work or your relationship or your workout, or if you fall down a flight of stairs. It's all just stress. It's
all just stress. And that's really what I try to teach people is that, when we look at, everything is a stressor, whether it's a gut bug or your boss is a jerk or, like you said, you fell down a flight of stairs. It's all just considered stress, and you're going to have this very similar response in the body.
Mm-hmm. And the things to address that are things that we've talked about earlier on in this episode, which is, obviously stress mitigation. And sometimes for my clients that are listening, that means taking a week off of training. Mm-hmm. And I think people are afraid to do that, but everything is a stress. We need to manage your stress. We have an inverse U of stress going on. We can't have too little. We can't have too much. We have to be right in the middle. Do you see any negative implications from people who don't have enough of a stress in their life? Does that play any role in what you do?
I mean, it really kind of depends on the person and their personality. But yeah, I mean, I think some people thrive on a more stressful environment. Like it gives them kind of motivation because they'll be like, I'll show you. Whereas there's some people who are like, there's no stress. And so they're just kind of lack of motivation. They're like, I don't have any stress, but they also have lack of motivation. And I think that kind of, there's a fine line between, too much stress and, there's good stress. There's eustress when you're growing, when your kids are growing, it's that good stress. When you've got a plant growing, it's that good stress. So we do have a good stress as well as that negative stress. But yeah, I mean, I do think that there are people, and I don't get a lot of people that say they don't have a lot of stress, but yeah, I mean, there are people that are just like, total lack of motivation.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't train. They don't try to improve. Everything's just kind of okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh. And there's some genes that we can look at for that. And it's like, are you that happy-go-lucky person, or are you that person that's like, the glass is half empty and just kind of blah. And we can actually kind of look at that. And once you get very schooled and being able to look at these nutrigenomic panels, you can kind of look at people and be like, oh, I bet they have this and I bet they have that. And then sure enough, you're like, mm-hmm.
So kind of on the opposite end of that, like a lot of the reasons why you may have too much stress or anxiety could come from this. But if you have not enough motivation, and maybe that's causing depression or something else that you're feeling, that could be just the same type of thing, just on another end of the spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
That is interesting.
What's the future of this? Like, I know you mentioned earlier, because to me it just sounds like an awesome thing that you could do with someone who's young to help, as a parent, to help shape their future in the best way possible. But you mentioned like you don't think that will happen. I'm just wondering, like, what's the future of this type of technology and test?
It is growing. It is growing every day. There's some of these tests where they run 12,000 pages of data and they kind of use it for research. We're very refined in what we do at GX as far as what genes are on our panel, and they're scientifically backed, and we look at all the studies that go behind them, and there's particular reasons we use them. And I do think it's changing, and the more providers and practitioners learn how to use it, the more life-changing it becomes for that many more people. I don't know that it'll ever be accepted as conventional or mainstream, but it definitely works. And, as far as what we're working on, we have a really awesome nutrition and diet and lifestyle panel coming out in the next couple of weeks that's going to look at 384 different variants. We're going to look at diet, and exercise recommendations and supplementation recommendations. And it's going to be really the most cutting edge nutrition panel on the market as far as diet and wellness and lifestyle. And being able to say, okay, here's these list of foods that you should be eating based on your genes. Here's this list of foods that you shouldn't be eating based on your genes. And here's kind of these supplement recommendations. It's going to be 3 stages. So it's like stage 1 is that detox kind of stage, get your body back on track. And then, building yourself up. And so looking at those different things that will apply to you. So I think the future of nutrigenomics is going to be really cool.
That's awesome. Cause I love this.
Yeah. I think this has been really exciting. And I'm excited to learn more about it. Travis, do you have anything else?
I got one quick last question.
Yeah.
What do you think about caffeine? Cause that's something that I love. And I've heard from some people that it's not good.
You have a gene for that.
Okay.
So some people are fast metabolizers. Some people are fast metabolizers of caffeine. Some people are slow metabolizers. So I am a super slow metabolizer of caffeine. If I have caffeine in the morning past like noon, I'm going to be awake for the next 48 hours. But there's people who metabolize it quite quickly, and we can look at it in regards to diet and lifestyle. And if you're a slow metabolizer, caffeine is going to stay in your system longer, and it may be beneficial in weight loss. So it really kind of depends. Like my husband and my younger son, they don't have that problem. And so my 14-year-old, he does coffee if that's his breakfast, and he has his coffee and he goes to school and he's perfectly fine as far as sitting and concentrating. But that, that works for him. So I do think that coffee has, some other implications as far as it can be pretty toxic. Like make sure you're drinking a clean source. But I'm not opposed or for caffeine one way or the other. Cool. I mean, if you have a lot of fatigue and adrenal issues, then maybe caffeine's not the best choice for you at that current space and time. But it's really about knowing who you're working with.
Cool.
Personally, I usually keep caffeine pretty low in my clients just because of the sympathetic driven state that it puts people into. You're not going to digest food as well if you're sympathetically driven.
And I agree. I totally agree with that. But I would say for the most part, except for my own kid, most kids are not out there drinking coffee. And
as far as kids,
I do work with a few adults, but kids are my jam.
Yeah. Okay.
But I mean, to your point, there's a lot of people who are having like not coffee drinks, and they don't realize they're having like 40 cups of coffee a day. You know what I mean? Like one drink could be like 12 cups of coffee that you just take like that. So
energy.
Yeah, exactly. That's literally like that's 9 cups of coffee.
300 milligrams of
350.
Caffeine,
that's like 9. That's like 9 cups, I think.
I think
or 7, 6.
Horrible.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot of coffee.
Yeah.
But that's one drink, just one.
But it's just one drink.
Yeah, but people are drinking like 5 or 6 of those a day. They're just like, I'm going to go to the gas station.
They're having.
So I can imagine in that circumstance, I already know that's not good.
No. Yeah.
That sounds terrible.
People don't know that. They just are like, oh, right, I got my energy drink. They have no clue.
They have no idea what's in it. Yeah. They don't know that like they had their coffee in the morning and they have an energy drink in the middle of the day, and then they have their pre-workout at night, and you're at 1 gram.
So this show is brought to you by Bang Energy.
Yeah, no, probably not. But there's some other garbage out there too.
Oh man. Well, we're just about coming up on an hour. This has been great. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I learned a lot about nutrigenomics, and I was right. We agreed on a lot. The only thing we disagree on is the energy from keto.
I'm gonna get you some research.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's get some research.
Yeah, we'll have you on the podcast again.
Yeah, that'd be another good conversation.
Physiologically and anecdotally, if that was the case, all athletes would be keto.
Look up Dr. Brian Walsh. He does, and I don't know if you can find it on YouTube. He does a fantastic explanation of why he's the best biochemistry teacher ever. But Dr. Brian Walsh, and he talks about, you really do make more ATP from fat.
Is it more? Or is it just longer lasting?
No, it's more, significantly more. I want to say, they're about to start. So off the top of my head, I think when you're doing fat, it's 121 ATP, whereas using glucose is in the 30s. Just off the top of my head, I could be completely wrong on those figures, but it's significantly more.
We'll have to look into it.
To me, it makes no sense, but maybe we'll have you back on the podcast.
That's what's cool about
debate.
these conversations and about, especially around nutrition, is because there's always different, like I always hear different opinions around certain things, and I learn a lot from that. So it's always good.
Yeah, it's great to have you here as our, I don't know, what did we call you?
I'm just dumb and curious.
Are you the moderator?
Yeah, something like that.
Oh man. Well, it's been great to have you on, Dr. Gibson. I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to connect. I do want people to know where they can find you. So before we take off, why don't you give yourself a little bit of the plug, tell people where they can find you, learn more about you and your testing and what you're doing.
Yep. So you can find me at regenerating.health. So www.regenerating.health. I'm on IG and Facebook at Regenerating Health. And then you can find me at gxsciences.com. I'm their corporate clinical educator. So if you're a practitioner who's listening and is like, oh, I really want to use Nutrigenomics in my practice, you know how to find me.
Awesome. Yes, I do believe that we will be in touch. And again, thank you for coming on. Thank you for everybody who's tuned in to listen to another episode of the Struggle to Strength podcast. We will see you all next week.